So first I'll ask you to introduce yourselves and tell me where you're calling from.
Hi,
My name.
oh,
Oh, Adrian, you first. You first.
hi, I'm Adrian Pijoan. I am an artist, the artist that created this exhibition. I'm calling in from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
My name is Wade. I am the founder and curator at Silicon Valet, and I am based in San Francisco, but calling in from New York City today.
And what is the title of your piece, Adrian?
The title is Believe in Us, but Not Too Much.
And when did you make it?
When did I make it? Um, is this
Like that, it was like a. I feel like it was
it's last year, like a year ago, right?
like it was 2021.
Oh, wow, two
I
years
think. Let
ago.
me just double check. I can tell you exactly. Hang on. I hope my. Wait.
Let me see.
Oh my God! I just typed in the wrong URL. I thought that I lost my domain. I was like losing my mind.
Um, was it not 2022? This is terrible that I don't
I
know.
feel like it was earlier. I think it was the spring of 2021.
March 16th, 2022. So yeah, just recently turned
A
one.
year ago.
Um, it's like this is obviously something that I could pull up myself, but I ask this question and it ends up being a portal, or like so many people have been like just sort of like painting their own associations with whatever time they made it. But yeah, it is wild that that was a year ago.
I
Um,
I that is like really mind blowing to me. It was only a year ago.
yeah.
Whoa, that's a brain. That is like a total time warp.
Um, and Adrian, tell me more about your workflow to create it. And so, I mean, obviously, and Wade, your like curatorial workflow and how you collaborated.
Yeah, so I have been working with themes of the paranormal for a long time, about a decade now. And I have this massive archive, both of physical books and documents that are sort of behind the camera right now, like spilling off of several bookshelves onto the floor of my studio. And also this large archive of paranormal websites and other information, just like stuff on the internet. And I'd been wanting to do something with this archive for a long time. Its fragility really is something that continues to be concerning to me. Every time I go back to it's actually a Google document with my list of paranormal websites. Like, there's 10 more links that are broken, and I go to them on Wayback Machine, and they sort of half load, and assets are missing. So I had a lot of assets that I had downloaded from these websites onto um, my computer as well. And again, my initial thought was to do something more archival, but I'm not a super great archivist. And also, what's interesting is a lot of these paranormal websites will occasionally be like, all right, we're going to be the ultimate archive of all the paranormal information on the internet. And you see the person sort of give up on that after a couple months, because there's too much to you have to dedicate a lifetime to it. So I became more interested in capturing the spirit of the material rather than presenting like a true archive of the material. But it was great. I hadn't had like a good venue for doing this because it didn't make sense as a physical gallery installation to me. So when the opportunity to do this at New Art City came along, it was perfect because a lot of this is material from the internet that I want to continue to live on the internet in a different form.
That's so beautiful. I mean, it really like relates to the kind of themes about archiving that we're talking about. And I mean, I'm getting involuntary memory from hearing you talk about it and showing some of these sites. And Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that there's an impulse in this community to try to make a totalizing archive of something that is so varied and so subjective, and so it kind of like captures the subjectivity of the archivist. Um, so I mean, that's interesting that like the things that you're installing here are sort of something you've been collecting for a long time, but I'm curious how like a this is kind of later pandemic, but like was this like a result of the pandemic, or how did the pandemic impact your work? And I guess the other question is like, what was your practice like before?
My
Maybe, well,
practice,
before you jump in, Adrian, like one
yeah.
thing that I'll say is that I think, like on a couple different notes, like first of all, I think that, I had been seeing this body of work that Adrian was making develop over the course of a number of years. And it really did feel like it needed a moment to be told. And so in thinking about like an archive, like I was really concerned with, you know, presenting this information in a phenomenological way that felt true to how Adrian experienced, encountered, and had been working with the work, for years. So that I think was like definitely, at least on my side, curatorially was the aim, like, was again like not to be like a totalizing or like totality of archive, but yeah, again, to be something that like you could enter into and that like the experience spoke the story. um and just related to, I'll say this just really quickly on the pandemic. Silicon Valley was started right before the pandemic, about like literally like 3 or 4 months before the pandemic struck. um and it definitely gave like wind to the sails in the sense that like people cared about being on their computer and looking at art together on their computers in ways that they hadn't before. And I think that, as part of that, like to me, for myself at least, and just like, vaguely helping Adrian to organize this, I really, this work was all him, but, I think that a lot of there definitely was an impetus more so than before to create something really enriching online in a way that I don't think that I felt the like urgency of pre-pandemic. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Or it's like, I think one of the themes that I've been uncovering with this question is that, like, there are some people who are showing virtually out of necessity because they can't show in a gallery. But I think the story that, like, I had this body of work for many years and I wasn't sure where to put it, and this ended up being a really authentic venue for it. The fact that it's like, it's not necessarily born out of necessity, it's actually born out of sort of the new ability to do installation in this way. So I think that's really cool. Thank you, Wade. Um, but yeah, I would love to hear sort of more about what your practice is like offline and online, Adrian. Like, had you ever shown in a virtual space before?
Yes, I had done a show with Deformal Gallery before this, but that was more of a like a browser, like a web page, um, rather than a virtual space.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a long online practice. Before this, I had in 2013 developed a performance character named Dr. Howard, who's a paranormal researcher, ufologist, and he actually shows up in this show, a 3D scan of his face. And I did some live performances with Dr. Howard, but he mostly existed online. He had a YouTube channel, Instagram account, and wrote a couple articles for websites. And so I had this long, and it was very much the videos were very much designed to live on YouTube and sort of exist in the YouTube ecosystem. Like I can't imagine in a similar way, I can't imagine like exhibiting those videos. I have other video art that does make sense in a gallery space and short films, but Dr. Howard's videos were very much YouTube videos, and that's where they live. And he has his own web page as well. So like he had this whole sort of online world built up of these different components. Interestingly, I did a live performance as Dr. Howard the week before lockdown, in a gallery that was so packed that it was like it was standing room only, and like nobody else could come in the door. And it was like such one of the best moments of my life. It was so much fun. It went so well. And like guest musicians and stuff. It was like this whole spectacle. And then I was like, I'm going to do this every week forever. And then, we had 3 years of COVID. So it was funny because that project was sort of moving to be more in person, and then sort of shifted back to being digital. But I do have this long digital and online practice.
It feels very authentic to the internet to have this this identity not kind of exist in a single avatar, but be kind of like plural across all of these channels. That's really, really cool. And how long had it been before you started the accessibility stuff that you had returned to your space? And like, what did it feel like to come back?
I've returned a couple times over the years, but usually just to kind of like check in if I'd included it in a portfolio or something. This was the first time that I really came and spent a lot of time in it. And I don't know. I don't know that I have something like really profound to say about it, except that I love it and I'm proud of it. And it's like, it's really nice to come across it again.
It's a perfectly reasonable answer. Have you been back in a while, Wade? Did you check it out before this?
Yeah, I did actually. And it's one thing that I think is really beautiful about the space is that just like our memory, like just in the same way that our memory is like incomplete and fragmented, and we kind of like surprise ourselves, I feel like this space surprises me too every time I enter. And every time I enter, it's been a while, so like I misremembered where things were placed. I also know that Adrian's been updating it a little bit, and it every time I enter, you kind of get that like strange disorienting feeling, like when you get back to your house after a vacation and you're like, did I leave that glass out on the counter? Like, was somebody here? And I think that that's very intentional, or not intentional, but rather that is a inherent affect of this kind of space based on the way that Adrian has so like thoughtfully constructed it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like virtual spaces are spaces, and like having a memory of it it's so particular. And like I've seen a lot of people like get lost in their talk about like getting lost in their own spaces, and that happened to me like live during a performance once.
Yeah,
Um,
it's so real.
yeah.
It's totally real. And I think that as well, like that kind of experience also really closely speaks to the nature of this information that Adrian is working with and the nature of the material. And to me, I find like I am just so incredibly proud of this show on behalf of Adrian, because I think that it accomplishes everything that we talked about and everything that he was attempting to do like so flawlessly. I like couldn't imagine an upgrade or an alteration that does that better than it's already being done. I think that technically, formally, it's a really excellent work.
Hmm. I have one more question, and you touched on the fact that this is itself an archive, but I'm curious, like, how do you approach archiving in your own work? And I'm curious to hear your answer to this question as well, Wade. Like, how do you return to old files? Do you like resurrect them and reformat them? Do you revisit them for personal reasons? Like, how does that work for you?
Um, well, for example, I had a show in Mexico City just a few months ago, and I resurrected several old videos for that show, but I've like learned more about video editing since then. So I went back and like I did like I'm always doing, I guess the answer is I'm always doing like director's cuts of my own work. And I'm, yeah, always like fiddling with my own archive to improve things if they get shown again. And I like the sort of malleability of digital files that way, where you can do that. And as you grow as an artist or learn new tricks, you can improve or adapt them to better suit where you're at as an artist.
Yeah, it's really beautiful that digital media is not fixed. And it's a cool thing about New Art City shows where they like exist in whatever state you last edited in them, but they can always shift.
I think that from my side, I approach the idea of archiving from a research point of view, in the sense that as a curator, I constantly am looking for information about past shows. And there are two things that I need in order to understand that, what I think about is like, if I'm looking for a show, if I'm trying to understand a show, I need installation images of what it looked like. I need a text that describes the intent, it could be a press release even. Um, those are kind of the core things. Like if I have 5 images and a press release, like I can understand a show. I can figure out what the artist's intent was. And I understand that resources are limited and time is limited, and I am not the kind of person who is ever going to like maintain maintain an archive to the level of conservatorial rigor that I like know exists in the world. But what I do try to maintain is something that is a living, usable research record. So for all of the shows, there are at least 10 installation images that show like wide virtual shots of the space. There is a text on the website that describes what we were thinking about. And there are links to social media. The rest is kind of like right now, a lot of it's archived on siliconvalley.org. I hope that doesn't go anywhere, like as long as Wix doesn't like explode. And on New Art City, of course. So I hope you guys don't explode either. But I think that, at the bare minimum, like I understand this work also to live through the expanded space of the like expanded internet artwork, right? Like the work is not just the work. The work is every version of the work. The work is every image of the work. The work is every tweet about the work, all of that kind of forming a constellation that comprises the meaning that, the artist really, that all are kind of extraneous, but like, can't really be extricated too far away from, the work. And that's a really hard thing to archive and like document, but I think it's important to try.
I totally agree.
And so, I mean, at least I hope that through some kind of hyperlinking situation that maintains some form of integrity. But again, obviously, like it's only been a year. Like, who knows what's going to happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And so I appreciate having this conversation because these are important things to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a first overture to thinking about like what is a 5 or 10 year vision for preserving these artworks, and like documentation in this kind of sense, I feel like is an important component of that. We materialize on this flashing desert with all of these. It's like there's clip art floating around and spinning. There's a spinning UFO. There are these really low res like lightning gifs, big red text that says classified, and an alien laying on the ground who's kind of writhing. What can you tell me about what we're seeing right now, Adrian?
Yeah, so we arrive in the space inside of a crashed UFO. Presumably, we're one of the occupants of that UFO. And there's sort of other fragments, 3D models of UFO debris scattered around. Maybe this is the Roswell crash site or one of the other famous crash sites. That's sort of all of them together. as like a dream space. And then we sort of are looking at this collage in front of us that's comprised of assets and materials that I pulled from my archive of websites about paranormal topics. And mixed in with it are redacted government documents about UFOs, which are in there both because of their aesthetics, but also because of the way that they match my my feelings about this material in general, where there's pieces that are redacted and missing. Some of them I've manipulated, like I've removed the UFO from one of the UFO photos in a government document, so you can like see through it to see the ongoing collage behind it. And yeah, I mean, the collage is very much like, I don't even know if collage is the right word for it, is it's meant to be explored and viewed from multiple angles. And I spent a lot of time sort of arranging things so that it would be visually interesting to move through, rather than just see, like, it's sort of a flat two-dimensional image when you first see it, but then as you move through it, it expands as you're exploring the components of this this archive, or yeah, the
I
pieces
love
that
the
I
way
pulled
they're
from it.
animated, so you can't like you're not required to grab onto each one. There's one that just keeps like flying through. It looks like you recorded the keyframes with your like mouse movement. It's very like human, like almost like it's walking around. And I can see now, yes, we're like we start in the middle of like three shards of a crashed spacecraft. And I see some like red rocks around too. It has a very like New Mexico kind of vibe.
Yeah, one thing that I'll like add thinking about this space is, well, first you're kind of walking along a sandy desert floor, but all of the materials feel very incomplete or feel fragmented. They're not meant to be read top to bottom, just the same way that this material, a lot of it is not fabricated, I would say, but like the nature of this kind of material is very emotional. There's a lot of like filling in the gaps in your head just based on kind of assumptions. There's a lot of, I think, like when I like honestly, when you see like an unclassified government document about flying saucers or old news report, you almost don't need to read the story. You can, the story kind of happens in your head. You kind of like all of these things, you understand them without having to read them top to bottom, if that makes sense, which I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really great that it's mirrored in the landscape. Um, I'm loving this like flaming green alien conspiracy text with like a transparent diagram overlaid. There's a like low res like spinning globe, this little sphere thing. I want to go inside the sphere.
A
See.
lot of the aesthetics, I think, replicate or speak to like early web 1.0 and early 2.0 like internet aesthetic, especially in like the file quality, in the colors and the textures. You mentioned like an alien conspiracy like title that's blinking and has fire coming out of it, and that's like it's very specifically kind of from that early internet era.
And one thing I want to say is the age that I am, like, this is the internet that I grew up with, right? So part of it really does refer to my own memories, my own first experiences on the computer. Yeah.
And in many ways, like the clip art on the sites that you're going back to are probably in this aesthetic as well, or like there must be a lot of Web 1.0 in there.
Yes, there is a lot of it is, I mean, the 90s had such a ufology boom because of things like the X-Files.
Mm-hmm. So we're walking up towards a canyon. There's an alien who's kind of gesturing for us to go further. There are a couple of owls up above, and there's a sign that says "Warning: U.S. Air Force installation. No drone zone. Photography is prohibited." And there's some floating text that says, "Nature rejects the naivete that seeks absolute truth."
So beautiful. I really love that sentiment.
It's so good.
And I'm so glad you included that, Adrian. One thing that I definitely want to point out here as well is that as you enter this part of the space, you kind of go, it's like you're entering a canyon. There are rocks on both sides and they kind of tower above you. And the owls that Sammy mentioned are kind of peeking out from behind the rocks, like they're looking at you. I know that the owl is a really important symbol for many reasons. Adrian, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, yeah, that particular symbol and what it means.
Yeah, so in the narrative of UFO abductions, a lot of people won't remember the experience at first and later recall it through regression hypnotherapy. And instead of recalling the alien abduction, they'll have what are called screen memories. And frequently owls stand in place for the extraterrestrial beings. So people have memories of like, oh, I was walking in the woods and saw owls, but I can't remember exactly when that was. And that'll frequently be like that then under hypnotherapy, they'll remember that it was aliens and not owls. And these owls, this is sort of a fun, while we're talking about archiving, the owls are all kind of like melted looking. And it's because they're AI generated. And it's funny to me that, in the years since we've done this show, how much like consumer accessible AI image generation has evolved. So they of themselves are sort of like a record of like the really early, like the first wave of websites where you could go and enter prompts and get AI images for free. And they're like, I really liked that aesthetic because, if they're standing in for a memory of an extraterrestrial, they should look kind of odd. But they captured this moment of like when all my friends were making AI images for the first time, and the aesthetic of AI images from that moment.
That was something, one of the unexpected themes I've encountered in these interviews is many more people than I realized were trying out AI, and there's so much material from like the transition from the GAN era to the stable diffusion era. And I didn't even clock that these were AI generated, but now that I look at them, you can kind of tell.
Yeah. Oh, and all the quotes come from primary source documents in the archive. There's a few other pull quotes sort of hovering in the space as we go through.
Oh, that's incredible. Is this Dr. Howard?
Yeah, so we arrive at Dr. Howard at the end of the canyon, a 3D scan of his face. And
So
we can
one
sort
thing
of,
else, before we get into Dr. Howard, I want to mention one other thing that was complicated and I hadn't seen before. Adrian did it, which is the searchlights above that are moving through the space. It really adds this effect of like something is going on, something is happening. It adds a sense of scale and makes you feel smaller. It illuminates certain things in interesting ways. Like for instance, there is a UFO flying overhead that at the end of the canyon goes over the giant Dr. Howard head and kind of like lights it eerily from different angles as the lights move through.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and
Yeah,
this
that
was
is
like a
really impressive. And it's sort of making this red canyon look like glowing magma kind of. The breathing effect when we were sitting back in front of the owls was really cool. Um, and you did do scale really well. Like it does, you feel like enveloped by it, which can be kind of hard to do in virtual space. And like, so Dr. Howard's head, your like eye line is right about at his teeth. So he's really huge.
Yeah, this
and I
really
always,
impressed me technically because I think lighting in virtual space is so difficult. Um, that to have this like moving, roving light that works really well and meshes really well with the fog, atmospheric textures. Yeah, it's really affecting,
I
for
totally agree.
lack of a better word.
Yeah.
and I always sort of hope that people will enter the next area by walking through the head rather than around it. Though I have no way of knowing whether people do that or not.
I felt invited to do so because he's like completely blocking the path. I guess
Yeah.
I should also describe what Dr. Howard looks like, or do you have, or like, are there things about the character that you want to like identify?
Um, yeah, the character always has this wig on. It's always the same wig, so that I could have different hair, but that was sort of what was identifying. And it was sort of just like a goofy idea originally, but then ended up being super effective for me because even to this day, when I put that wig on, I like immediately become him and transition into his headspace. Um, he also has a pair of glasses that he always wears, but I couldn't. The 3D scanning that I used would have just made those like smushed against his face, so I didn't wear the glasses for these. So he is missing that. Um, but yeah, the wig is sort of the most identifiable part of Howard, other than maybe his outfits. He wears like goofy ties and like a sort of ill-fitting blazer.
And I mean, the look on his face is pretty priceless. The eyes are like pretty wide, and it's like it's a faint smile, but I wouldn't describe it in smile-like terms. Like his teeth are showing for sure. But I'm also kind of curious, like, what is he like as a person?
So Howard is my way of believing everything, like sort of taking the like I want to believe and just making it I believe, so that when interacting with this material, I could just like fully accept it with zero agnosticism, even like just full on belief, whatever paranormal material I encounter. He's like very positive, very credulous, maybe a little gullible and naive. um yeah, very there was a lot of like physicality to the performance. Like he's sort of always like tripping over himself and like dropping things.
Oh,
But
that's
yeah.
incredible. I'm so glad I asked.
And there's also, I mean, not to go too far into this, but I think that there's a lot like, in speaking to what you were saying, Adrian, about like belief and like, and Dr. Howard being your vehicle for belief, there is so much overlap, I think, in terms of how Howard mapped to your own journey or experience, or I don't think that that can really be understated. I also think that it's important context to know that like there was a long period of time where many people didn't know like if Dr. Howard was a joke or how serious it was, or if it was a real person, or what have you. And Adrian operated very legitimately in that way, and so I think that like the audience perception of Dr. Howard is a really crucial part of the story.
Oh,
To this
yeah,
day,
that's so incredible.
he gets questions on YouTube, and I still answer them as Howard.
Oh, that's incredible. And I mean, I love the way that the character has like a private purpose for your research and also kind of has this like expansive public identity. So we go through Howard's mouth, and this like rotating GIF of a tiny green alien like hitting an enormous bong is one of my favorite images on the whole internet. And then there's a dancing alien in the middle, and then there's another like animated transparent PNG of a person in an alien costume.
I would like to clarify and just point out that the alien is not in the center, is not just dancing. The alien is in fact twerking, and looks good doing it too.
It does. I wasn't sure whether to describe that as twerking.
Yeah, it is. The alien is twerking.
Okay, good. Thank
This
you.
is, yeah, and if you come out of the head and turn around and look back inside, I mean, this is I mean, that's wonderful. But I meant like further though I did spend a lot of time doing that. Like so we can get a view of the inside of the head with all the
Oh, I
components.
see. Oh, right. I see.
I
The
do
other
love
direction.
how a 3D head looks from the inside.
Yeah, it's really funny.
Yeah, this is just sort of like, this is how my brain feels after like a long day of, reading and absorbing paranormal material, just in a little composition.
Yeah, I'm saving that screenshot for sure.
So one thing, like maybe while we're like, you know, like about to transition spaces here to talk about is the title of the show a little bit more.
Totally. Yeah, that's a good story.
Because I think that like believe in us but not too much is a really like there are exhibitions where titles matter and then there are exhibitions where like titles really matter. And I think that the title of this show is really important, really brilliant, in fact, and speaks to all of the different modes of like belief and knowledge making that Adrian is accessing throughout the work. I don't want to say too much yet though. Adrian, maybe you could talk a little bit about what believe in us but not too much means to you.
Yeah, again, like a lot of the material and the quotes in the show, it comes from a primary source. It comes from a abductee named Herb Shermer, who was a policeman in Nebraska in the 60s. And he sort of similarly had these strange experiences, missing time, things like that, and then eventually underwent regression hypnotherapy to remember his abduction experiences. And he had one experience in particular where the aliens took him onto a craft, like showed him some like advanced technology, I think took him somewhere and then brought him back and dropped him off. And as they were dropping him off, one of the extraterrestrials came up to him and said, "You should believe in us, but not too much." And I love that so much. And it's sort of like a personal mantra when I'm not Howard, for thinking about this material. And I think it's this has become less an issue now, but there was a moment where ufology and conspiracy stuff got really mixed up with like right-wing politics in the US during the Trump era. And it really made me sad because there's not anything like intrinsically linking those things. It was really more that like sort of radical right-wing extremist groups were recruiting from ufology and conspiracy groups, much in the same way that like the Heaven's Gate cult recruited from those groups, just because it's like, you have these people that are interested in this sort of alternative version of reality and like very open to ideas. And so they're very, I don't know the right word, but they're easy to recruit, perhaps.
Susceptible, amenable. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's interesting because I remember the story that you told about cults recruiting people from health food stores, that like
yep.
nothing is intrinsically linking either of these things to far-right extremism except the sort of receptivity of the subject.
Yeah, Heaven's Gate would send recruiters to health food stores. Yeah, and it's just like, and in the 90s, like, yeah, like organic food was like a radical idea. And like, if you shopped at a health food store, you were sort of like a free thinker, right? Like interested in alternative ideas about reality. And so, in the US, we can be very like extremist about things. And there became this moment where it was like, if you believe in aliens, you're also like believe in QAnon. And like, I don't know. And it was really bothering me because I think we should be receptive to ideas of other dimensions or extraterrestrials or whatever. Like I prefer a reality where these things could exist, just in terms of like living, like it even makes living my day-to-day life like more interesting and enjoyable and possible to imagine these alternative realities. But so it's sort of like yeah, it's both like a personal mantra and a sort of ethos that I live by and hope to encourage in the world of like, you can experiment with belief and you can, I don't know, you can believe in aliens and still get the COVID vaccine or whatever. Like you can do whatever you want. And sometimes it's just fun to imagine that Bigfoot is real and like it doesn't have to be a political statement or like affect your life. It can just be like, I enjoy thinking about the possibility of Bigfoot.
Yeah, and like I think to me the part that resonates the most is this idea of both and that is present in this show and that Adrian was just speaking to. That's something that just personally, I just like that's one of the reasons why I think I resonate with this work so much, is that both and attitude, that kind of mindset of you can have these competing, conflicting things coexisting at the same time. We don't live in a binary society. Life does not exist as black and white. There's a whole, for lack of a better term, gray area, like in between, where all of this can live and where rich imagination takes place and where synthesis happens, like really, really important synthesis. And I think that the other thing, that is really important is the aspect of fun, of playfulness, of silliness. Like we were just talking about like a twerking alien and like an alien ripping a bong. And it's those symbols like may seem like trite or like just silly, but they're really important vehicles in this work. They remind us that things shouldn't be so serious all the time. They remind us that we can play, we need to play, we need to imagine outside of like prescribed ideas about even like what aliens are. It's important that we don't just think about them in this monolithic like grays and flying saucers kind of context. We need to imagine aliens twerking and aliens smoking weed and doing all of these things, because that's an important part of our cultural generation. It's an important simulation pathway for thinking through I don't want to say like paranormal, but like the extra normal, which like whether we like it or not exists alongside of us every day. Like there's weirdness inherent to the experience of being a human on this planet with other people. And particularly again thinking about like belief, extremism, the far right and the far left movements that are polarizing this country that we live in. I wouldn't speak to the other countries, but but in America, definitely we're living through. And this show just feels like such an apt metaphor for all of it. Like in this space, I feel understood. I feel seen. I feel like aspects of ways that I personally view the world are expressed and like make sense to me as a person who grew up on the internet, who grew up, maybe I'm a bit younger than Adrian, like who grew up maybe like more in kind of a post-truth, like post-social media environment where truth is totally relative and based solely on perception. And this show like wades through all of that. Like you can, like whether or not there's an answer at the end, that's not the point. The point is that this show gives you the phenomenological experience of like wading through contemporary reality and grappling with it in a lens that is so specifically Adrian. And just like every time I enter this space, like it just like I feel like a gong is being hit in my head. Like like I walk in, I'm like bong, like this all makes sense to me. It's just kind of like, that's such a weird way of describing it, but that's how it feels. It
It's this like
really,
synthesis of aesthetics across these eras of the web, finally like reaching a 3D web. But it's such an interesting because it's like I feel like the Web 2 era is all of these like mashups of like old aesthetics and new aesthetics.
Mhm.
I will say also that we're seeing a bunch of different like images and diagrams of UFOs. There's one really sick chart of a bunch of different UFOs that have been sighted in different places. It's like presented in a like a 4x6 grid of these small black and white line drawings, and the background is transparent. But there are like a ton of these around, and the text in front of us says UFO abduction and the Greys. I hadn't heard of Greys before. Let me see text that says the UFO Enigma, and there's
I
some
mean, that's
more.
another important thing too, right? It's like and that's something that I think that this show speaks to and why it's so important to even like do this exercise of archiving and relating the story and describing, because like even in these pools of collective knowledge about phenomena that are beyond individual understanding, right? Like aliens are really a group think kind of phenomena that are based on many people coming together and sharing stories and myths and perceptions. For instance, there's a quote right here on screen as we're looking that says aliens and humans here to experience emotion in the illusion of linear time. And that really speaks to the whole kind of experience that's happening here. And like, as you're saying that, you're like, oh, I hadn't even heard of the Greys before, like, it just goes to show the kind of ways that this grassroots, not grassroots, like almost folklore is preserved for the future and told, because there is something new that people in all of, like, for instance, I didn't know about the owl symbol. I thought when I learned about that, when Adrian was telling me about abduction experiences, like that was so important. And then I started seeing owls in all of these cultural references and in my own life and these things, and I think that it's important to have, or there's an important mode of like semiotic connection that's happening in this show of, again, synthesis of all of these ideas and all of these symbols that create kind of like a shaky but cohesive whole. Like, this isn't a show where any of the individual parts make sense, just as any of the individual accounts of alien abductions or paranormal sightings or astral projection or what else you might have, like, aren't understandable in isolation. They're so fantastic and like beyond belief. But together as a cultural narrative, as a phenomenon that has been persisting in various ways for centuries, like we can even look back at like ancient, like Aztec, Maya, indigenous artifacts that reference sky people or sun people or what have you. These are mythologies that seem to be inherent to human experience across time, across cultures, across like across continents. And you kind of feel that in this show, this kind of cohesive collection of like, what the fuck, for lack of a better, way to describe it.
And now we're inside. We were beckoned inside of this building by another alien, and there's some like spacecraft parts that are up on these little like pedestals or poles. They're like mounted, and then there are these big like glass tubes full of like aliens and alien organs and these like green intestine like shapes.
Yeah, this room is the research laboratory, the test site, if you will. There's definitely a feeling of being inside. This is definitely an interior space. It's a little bit bare, as one might expect to find in a government offsite storage facility, secret warehouse, alien architecture that's simple and, forms that are understandable to humans. There is also a really interesting thing happening inside where like you get a little bit of the light from outside, the flashing searchlights kind of glaring through the open windows in this laboratory space. And again, that just reinforces the feeling of like having entered somewhere, but something's still kind of going on outside. You can kind of feel the UFO searchlights looking for you.
And the
Almost.
floor is still sand, which makes me think maybe the lab hasn't been visited in some time.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like a bunker, like referencing the bunkers where allegedly materials from Roswell or other crash sites were taken by the government and perhaps still exist, or in New Mexico, the sort of like nuclear storage facilities that are here. Visually, it's like a transition space. It's supposed to be a little bit of a like less busy sort of a break, like the canyon, as we move from one theme into another theme. Something that I wanted to play with here with the alien bodies, with the writhing intestines, is a concept I think about a lot, about the like, there's always this interest in the paranormal literature about like what happened to the bodies of extraterrestrials, but there's never any like sense of like sadness or grief about them. It's always just like, why is the government hiding from them from us? And like, but for me, there's this real like grief of like, what, like, okay, like they've taken these like sentient beings that traveled across the universe and like, dissected them and hidden the parts away somewhere, like assuming that these narratives are true. So I don't know, I wanted to bring that aesthetic in here a little bit. So it's sort of like, it's meant to be like a little bit of like a creepy space as well.
Thank you, Adrian. Should we go through this? Should we go through this entryway? Oh, this
Yeah.
also looks like a fuselage that was blown apart that we're walking through.
Yeah, so we exit through some other UFO wreckage.
The Greys claim that they know these things will happen because they aren't limited by time flowing in a single direction.
Yeah, so one other thing that I think is important too is like not just like a really static understanding of this material as like obscure cultural artifacts about like extraterrestrial phenomena. This is really work that speaks to fundamental cross-cultural understandings of reality. Like these are explorations not only of, say, quote unquote aliens, but also of time, of experience, of the capacity of the mind, of the limits of the body, that really expand out past, say, what we see on screen right now, which are illustrations of crop circle drawings.
I was gonna say this looks like a crop circle,
Yeah,
transparent PNG in green.
it's actually a 3D model.
It's
Oh, I
just a really
see.
skinny 3D model.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like tubes, and they're all these like concentric and interlocking circles that are connected by little lines.
So
It was
guys,
definitely it was also like playing with what was possible in New York City. Like there was so much play that went into creating the show. It was just a really fun platform to work with. And yeah, some things are in there just because, as Wade was saying, it was like a space for play and like imagining these realities and seeing how they could manifest in this space.
Yeah, I think New Art City is really like suitable for experiments. I think it's a pretty common story. There's like I was kind of trying to see what would work, or like trying to make art with my phone and just like put it all in there. We see some Bigfoot tracks, another crashed UFO. There's an owl, and there's like an archway in stone with like a twinkling sky through it. Should we go through there?
Yeah, we can come back to the UFO.
Yeah, and like I like the sort of way that you have footprints and like aliens like leading you from one place to the next. Ah, there are two graves like menacing in front of us. There's a bunk bed kind of buried in the sand, and there's like a computer buried in the sand. I see some like flowered wallpaper, some like grainy video of like people surrounding an alien body, like a crayon drawing out the window of this sort of like must be like an abandoned house of like an alien family looking in at you. It's very like crude.
So this is a recreation of one of my childhood bedrooms, where I first started having my own paranormal experiences. I have like all sorts of sleep disorders, one of which is like I experience sleep paralysis very frequently.
Oh my goodness.
And this is the an exploding head syndrome, both of those like at least once a week. And this is the room where all of this started happening, and I started having these, as you do, these visions of shadow people or the other sorts of like typical things you see under sleep paralysis that often are the sorts of experiences that people later re-experience as alien abduction under regression hypnotherapy. So I have this very like personal relationship with this work as well.
Oh, that's
with
fascinating.
this topic.
So we were talking about sleep paralysis, and how this can often be like surfaced as like alien abduction memories in regression hypnosis.
Yes. And actually, during my time in my MFA program, I underwent regression hypnotherapy to see if I could experience my early sleep paralysis experiences as alien abductions. And I just say I don't recommend doing that. Is definitely possible. And the hypnotherapy experience was more intense than I thought it was going to be. I'm glad I did it as an artist. I just like, if you're not an artist deeply invested in exploring these topics and you don't kind of want to like fry part of your brain, then don't do it. But I'm grateful that I did it. So
Yeah, that's intense. Intense. We're seeing text that says they're not ghosts, goblins, or figments of the drunk imagination.
yeah. Yeah, I wrote down tons and tons of quotes as I was going through this material. And
They're all so good, and like in this context, they're so like poetic. It's kind of like erasure poetry. The earth is covered with windows into those other unseen worlds.
that's in front of the portal that leads to the um, second part of the show.
Yeah, so we see three spacecraft floating above us, and one of them has the red tractor beam, and the portal says, "Take me home."
One other
Please.
thing I want to say about this space is that the like reality kind of starts to break apart here. Like there's like rocks that are floating in the sky, and there's like pieces of star, like twinkling star wallpapers that have been put onto three-dimensional forms. There's a cube and a sphere that are sort of floating as if like the ground is sort of like leaving to go up into the sky and the sky is coming down into the ground. It's like reality is sort of fragmenting as we get closer to the UFO and perhaps get abducted up into it.
And then we go into one of these UFOs, and I'm on the wrong side of the text. We have another text that says, perhaps the UFO question might even make man undertake studies which could enable him to construct a society which is most conducive to developing a completely human being, healthy in all aspects of mind and body.
Yeah, just pointing to some of the like utopian thinking in the world of the paranormal. Oh, and then there are all kinds of Easter eggs in the show hidden
Oh yeah,
inside of things. I still like forget where they are and encounter them randomly.
that's such a treat. I know that this is such a like a rich experience. Oh, I collected that one.
You did.
I love, so in this room, there are like in this room, you're inside of a UFO. And the UFO is rotating slowly, so you can see the like circular portholes out into the purple landscape beyond. And inside this is kind of like the gallery space. There is a series of GIFs that Adrian released via Silicon Valley on Get Nunc. And they're available trading on secondary now.
Yeah, I really like these sort of like rotating like concentric circles all around the inside of the UFO, and I see Dr. Howard swimming in the air, floating above. That's very impressive. It must have been a full body 3D scan that you then animated.
Yes. Yeah.
I also love the transparency on the swimming Dr. Howard. Like it's it's really nice touch. It's very ghostly. And I also like these rotating, green concentric circles above. They kind of like are reminiscent of, I don't know, like when you swipe your phone to answer a call, almost like there are aliens in your iPhone. or something like that.
No,
Right. So I was sitting inside of this and I thought they were rotating all around the inside of the spaceship, but it turns out it's like a cylinder that must be kind of like the tractor beam that draws you up into the spaceships. And I can see they're just rotating around this cylinder. Surrounded by dancing grays, got a headstand, another one who's doing the twist, another one who's doing a bit more like braking and spins. This one's stomping it out. So should we go through and look at each of these artworks? Oh, this one's so cool.
Yeah, that's the giant Dr. Howard head that you see kind of before you enter the UFO. You kind of enter into Dr. Howard's head and then into the laboratory where ultimately you're beamed up afterwards. And I really like this piece because it's kind of like a small diorama of the whole exhibition kind of inside of Howard's head.
Yeah,
and it's like, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the work itself is a 3D model, and this is just a animation exported of the model and then I think converted into a GIF. It might be a movie file, I don't remember.
Yeah, and so it resembles what we saw in the show, that like inside of the head, like the back is cut out and there's this little desert scene with the red rock arch with like the black void in it, and then there's a really nice flying saucer rotating up in the middle of the head with aliens or I guess they're called grays dancing on top of it. I mean, I think it's really interesting to sort of, now where it's like the expansive world is now kind of being condensed into these single artifacts.
Yeah, and they're very much constructed from the documents and ephemera from those websites and the pieces of my archive. They're sort of meant to be like mini curated portions of the archive.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like I'm seeing this same mechanic with there's the pin board with a bunch of like pieces of paper on it, like documents, and then there are a bunch of them all like floating around, and there's a gray with its hands sort of around the board, and it's just like rotating really quickly. So just like in the full space, you can't really like grab onto anything. It's simply like the fact that the collection is there.
I think, and so when we were at the outset of this show, like the primary, I think, objective or like concern was definitely the exhibition, the 3D space. But then after, I really wanted to experiment with the Tezos blockchain and what it looked like to use like a curatorial experience or use something that is rooted in experience first to then be in support of or like lead to like direct sales for the artist of unique artworks as a result of that process, right? And to try to bring a little bit of more of like a spatialized understanding of encounters with art into blockchain trading. And so I asked, I felt like creating NFTs of an exhibition was a really interesting opportunity to experiment with the kind of condensed and like micro scale of what was possible at that time on the Tezos blockchain. Like we had really specific file upload constraints. And it also, like in the context of an NFT market, it doesn't always make sense to like mint or edition either really large scale projects or like projects in their totality. Like it kind of makes more sense to break them into pieces or create representations of them that are unique to this format. And Adrian, this is what Adrian came back to me with from kind of that thought process. I don't know, Adrian, if you want to talk a little bit more about like, because this is one of your first times creating NFTs, correct?
Yeah, and I liked the idea of like, why would I want to put something on the blockchain? And for me, taking these sort of fragile, disappearing parts of the web and curating them into these little scenes that would then let these assets live on in some way, and maybe eventually we'll move on past the blockchain and somebody will find this and turn it into whatever the web 5 thing, like, but I like taking something from web 1 and sort of translating it into the current idea of what is sort of more permanent, and yeah, again, more about capturing the vibe or the spirit of the archive than like preserving it in a very direct archival way.
And
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like preservation by mutation. And
but also, I would say too that, like, not to say that these works are like also like the derivative of the exhibition. One thing that I was really excited about being able to use a non-fungible token to sell an artwork was that it made it, how do I say this? There was a lot of possibility for selling 3D sculpture and GLB file-based artworks in ways that what I hadn't really seen in earlier marketplaces. So I really was excited about these two works particularly because I also felt like this was like, for the first time in my career, I was able to like directly offer a 3D model for sale, something that people could download, they could play with, they could experience, and they could own in a way that was a little bit more intimate than like what was available previously.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the first NFTs I ever collected. And yeah, I mean, Adrian, have you minted any NFTs since?
I have not, which isn't to say that I wouldn't do it again. I feel like I was just caught up in a few other projects after this, but it is something I'd be interested in pursuing again, especially because I enjoy, like, I've made so many 3D models just for fun that I really enjoy, that either make their way into video works or things or don't. But I have this like huge library of stuff that I've made and collected that I enjoy sort of creating these compositions out of.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really interesting how many files we have on our computers, and it's like curating what makes it out into the world, whether it's through another sort of collection of artifacts or whether it's like on its own. And I think NFTs are really powerful as a way to kind of pull these things out of the archive and like make them accessible. So which of the 3D models were minted? Was Dr. Howard minted?
No, the two heads, the Dr. Howard head with the landscape inside of it and the alien head with the corkboard with all the documents flying around it, were both minted as 3D models. And then the saucer fragments were all minted as like large editions, for I think like very small amounts of Tezos, so like everybody could collect all 4 saucer fragments if they wanted to.
It's really nice. Yeah, and to visually describe these two here, I feel like this one really hits with the kind of NFT aesthetic, where there's these like concentric rainbow circles that are like not spiraling outward, but kind of like rippling outward, and then there are two hands in the foreground, and you're sort of in this forest scene, and at the center of this circular rainbow is a very GAN-like kind of evolving shape that looks like it's sort of interpolating between a lot of different flying saucers. And then on the left, welcome to my cyber reality, is like a computer screen, like a very classic CRT with a Windows XP background. And then all of these semi-transparent, like redacted documents are spiraling out of the screen towards you.
I like these pieces because they really each of them I think really interestingly stands on their own. They also each, like for me, I really love collecting work that I feel that I feel intimate with or that I've had an experience with. And so once you've like made it through the odyssey of like going through the whole archive of moving through the whole space, like these are really, I think they really nicely encapsulate the range of ideas that are being presented. Um, it's a nice little collection. I particularly love the one just to the left, the Bigfoot factor fantasy um, one with the owls kind of poking up in the background. Um, this is some really like classic OG Dr. Howard content, honestly. I love the like historical nods to Adrian's like, you know, long career. And yeah, this is a nice throwback for me.
Yeah, we're like flying through this like dark forest with like a big moon in the background, and there's like a super pixelated Bigfoot right in the center, and then more of these semi-transparent PNGs are kind of like floating through you, and it keeps saying Bigfoot fact or fantasy. And this hidden truth one that looks kind of like an album cover. It's interesting to see a lot of the assets that we saw in the 3D space kind of condensed into this single resonant object, where we have the same Adrian's bedroom with the sand, and we have these two grays like slowly moving in the center. On the bottom right corner is the green text, the hidden truth, and then we can see the flaming like alien conspiracy rising up in the background with these other like semi-transparent gifs sort of fading in and out over the frame, and there's a flying saucer swirling over the top with the like lightning. Yeah, I mean, it's just so great to have the spatialized archive, and then sort of the archival images that are kind of collecting all of these things into a new artifact.
One fun fact, real quick. Those grays, the two-dimensional animated grays in this, that's actually a photograph of me in an alien costume that I made. That I then just manipulated in Photoshop to sort of transform my body into the shape of the classic gray alien.
That very much did look like a human in a gray suit, and that is very special to know that is you in there. I want to go outside the spaceship. Oh yeah, so we have more of the shapes that we saw in the original space, like the three-dimensional crop circle diagram and the rock arch with the space void in it, spooky owls. Oh, and there is more to see out here. So there's this huge red rock thing, and then there's a little trapezoidal entrance to it, and we have, this looks like a render. Oh no, it's not. It's still a 3D crop circle that's pressed onto a little space GIF that's made into a cube, and then there's the gray head with the two hands, kind of like wiggling its fingers around the space cube. Oh, and then when you go inside, especially when you're not looking at the crop circle, it feels very, very expansive. This is super like meditative.
Yeah, I liked having a couple like quiet spaces since the show is very busy. I tried to integrate like a couple places where you could sort of take a rest.
Yeah.
I also like the kind of like hopeful, like peaceful note that the show ends on. It's like, you know, you kind of go through an experience of uncertainty or disease or like confusion or transformation or like learning. Like there's something like as you confront all of these different pieces from the archive. And I don't know, it's really nice to like all of like you kind of moving through this space at the end, you have this feeling of like completeness or of growth that feels really good. Like you leave the show with a really good feeling.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like, there's something about the image, like kind of takes power out of the chaos and says like we can still make meaning from this like mass of things.
I'm just like looking at the NFTs on object.com as well while we're talking about them, and I had forgotten that all the piece Windows into Unseen Worlds, which is the piece with the aliens, with the alien head holding the archive board, all of the available editions were sold to Tezos legend John for his like special emerging artist collection, which was really exciting. I was really, really stoked to see such a legendary artist supporting Adrian's work, and also like just recognizing how sick these pieces are. And
I'll update those links so they're
I know, I realized, yeah,
Yeah.
talk about kind of the way, like link rot being a theme of the original piece. Like, oh, it's like, because I mean, I remember earlier like seeing Hic et Nunc, and I was like, oh, right, that's gone now.
Yeah. And that's why
it's
earlier when I said, it's like there is this idea of the blockchain as existing forever, but there's already these instances of platforms going down. And for sure, I mean, the works exist on the blockchain, but now it's suddenly difficult to access them because the previous link to them doesn't work anymore unless they're in your collection already. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the things that really kind of opened my mind about blockchain, was when the original Hic et Nunc marketplace went down, and then people basically just remade the front end site basically overnight, and because the archive still existed on chain, and so this is just like a view layer. It feels somewhat different.
yeah.
I will say that at the time of this recording, there are editions listed by John for 14 Tezos, which is a real steal.
Ooh, I might front run that. I think I need another one of these in my collection.
Yeah, I totally did just now. I was like, oh damn, because I realized I didn't have one in my personal collection, only in the Silicon Valley collection where there's like an archive of one edition. But I don't know, this is making me think that I think I want to, I don't know, one day maybe we'll auction off the collection. These are super sick. Adrian, what did it how do I ask this question? Did you feel like, I mean, maybe this is me like projecting on my own experience of like completeness, kind of coming to the end of this, but like was building this exhibition like cathartic or like summative for you at all? Did you feel like a sense of like, I don't know, like tying it up with a bow?
Absolutely. Yeah. I had a real like gnawing feeling of needing to do something with this material, and this like, I feel like this is the show of that. Like I could make more work with that material in the future, but I don't need to. I don't feel this sense of urgency that I felt before because it exists in this format. Really these two formats, the New Art City show and the NFT works, and they're out there, and it's like this. Yeah, this is very much one of those shows that at the end of it I was like, this is the version of the work. Like it is complete, it is good, I'm happy with it.
The truth is out there.
The truth is out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really special how you used both of these new mediums that are kind of like the component parts of a supposed Web3, this sort of like three-dimensional interactive, and also the like, the blockchain archive, and it feels like a really authentic expression of the work in these spaces, that you're not just like doing it to do it. Do we have any other secret zones that that I wasn't able to find?
There are no other secret zones. I mean, there's some little Easter eggs, like that pixelated Bigfoot is hidden in a couple spots. But we covered the major zones for sure.
Well, dear viewers, I encourage you to explore on your own and find the Easter eggs yourself. And yeah, thank you both so much for making this and for sharing your time with me. I feel very enriched, like coming back to this space with you and hearing all of your thought process. And I'm really grateful that it's like included in this other archive.